if we could please stand for the presentation of the colors by Boy Scout Troop 1906.
Scout salute.
Let's give Boy Scout Troop Team 1906. At this time, we'll have prayer by Brother Douglas Jones. You all may be seated.
Let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity to be gathered together, Lord. We thank you for an intentionality that brings us together to consider crisis in education. There are many issues in our community. Lord, open our hearts and our minds that we may seek solutions, find solutions, and have the courage to implement solutions. We thank you for our panelists. Thank you for the brotherhood that gathers, and we ask your blessings on the work that will come. And Lord, we ask all blessings that we know not to speak of. In the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Brother Dr. Jones. We would like to welcome everyone to our Anchor Public Program, Crisis in Public Education. Before we begin, we must start by acknowledging and honoring our veterans. And so at this time, we will have Area 2 Director, Brother Paul Brown.
Good evening, everyone. As you know, I'm Brother Paul Brown, the Area 2 Director, but I'm also a retired Chief 1 Officer 4 with 30-plus years of service to the government and active duty. So, retired. It does my heart good that I can do this portion of the program because there's so many veterans that have given the ultimate sacrifice. And those that continue to serve our country the best way they know how. That 1% of the country's population, they care about everyone that's sitting in this auditorium. Next slide, please. Next slide. As this is the Veterans Day weekend, we like to say Happy Veterans Day on behalf of all the brothers and families of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Next slide. Next slide, please. We'd like to welcome all the service members, and we salute those who are serving, who have served, and also who have given the ultimate sacrifice. Next slide, please. And as we play this video, as we state your cohort or your service, I would like for you to please stand if you serve any part of the armed forces. As we begin, the United States Coast Guard.
United States Coast Guard.
The United States Marine Corps.
United States Marine Corps.
United States Army. Thank you. United States Navy. The United States Air Force. And ladies and gentlemen, I will be remiss if we did not include the United States Space Force. Thank you on behalf of ANCA and all service members.
At this time, I would like to bring up Brother Richard Moore to give our recognition of our guests.
Good evening. First, I'd like to welcome, and I know he's here, I'm not sure if he's in the room, but our General President, Brother Willis L. Lonzer III, is with us at the convention. If there is other national leadership that is here, would you please stand?
Vice President, Attorney Cecil Howard is here.
Okay, for Regional Vice President, Attorney Cecil Howard. If there are other regional leaders, would you please stand? All right, back in the back, yes. Our District Director, Brother Michael Pittman, please stand.
Assistant District Director is here.
And let's see, I see our Assistant District Director is here. Please stand. Amen. All right, we just recognize you. Okay. Any elected officials, would you please stand and state your name? Any elected officials?
Brother Walker Williams, Mayor of Sharpsburg, North Carolina.
Yes. Are there any candidates that are present? Any candidates in 2023?
All right. Yes, sir.
My name is Maurice Green. I go by Mo, and I'm a candidate for State Superintendent of Public Instruction for the entire state of North Carolina.
Now we'd like to recognize any of our divine nine that is present with us today. And as I call, you can just let us know you're here. Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated.
Okay.
Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated. Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated.
Got it.
Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated. Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated. Iota Phi Theta Fraternity Incorporated. All right, well, we thank you and we welcome you once again.
Ladies and gentlemen, our national treasurer just walked in, Brother Denzel Fleming. And we also would like to recognize his wife, Ms. Nikki Fleming. District Director Pittman will give us closing remarks at the end of our panel. And now for the moment you all have been waiting for. It is time for our panel conversation, crisis in public education. We're going to start by introducing our moderator for the evening. As a scholar, Dr. Anthony Graham leverages critical race theory to examine the academic experiences of African-American male students and the construction of their academic and ethnic identities in K through 20 educational environments, specifically focused on effective pedagogies to engage this special population. Using this theoretical framework, Graham explores the socio-cultural and socio-political experiences of African-American male K through 12 students and teachers in the United States public schools. He has published a variety of books, chapters, peer-reviewed journals, and co-authored a book. In addition, he has served as a managing editor of the historic peer-reviewed academic journal, the Negro Educational Review. On July the 1st, 2023, Dr. Anthony Graham assumed the position of interim chancellor at Winston-Salem State University. Prior to this, he served as the provost and vice chancellor for academic affairs at Winston-Salem State University. Prior to his position at Winston-Salem State University, Dr. Graham was a tenured full professor and dean of the College of Education at North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University. A graduate of Kinston High School, he attended the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where he earned the bachelor's degree in English with a minor in mathematics in 1997. He obtained the master's degree in secondary English education in 1999 from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and his doctor of philosophy in curriculum and teaching with a cognate in multicultural education in 2003 from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you our moderator for the evening, Dr. Anthony Graham.
Good evening, and thank you, Brother Bass. Brother Bass did mention that I'm one of his former professors at North Carolina State University. So you can imagine how pleased I am every time I see him doing the work of Alpha, doing the work of North Carolina A&T, doing the work of an educator, doing the work of a Black man. Good evening to everyone. Good evening. So glad to have you all here. Welcome to our brothers, your families, our friends, to our phenomenal panelists whom we will have the pleasure of hearing this evening. Our national leadership, our regional leadership, obviously our district director, my homeboy from Kinston, North Carolina, and First Lady Pittman. Thank you all so very much for being here. And thank you for allowing me to moderate this panel. In the interest of time, we're going to move fairly expeditiously here. We're going to spend about 30 to 35 minutes hearing from our panelists on this issue of a crisis in public education. And then right around 7:35-ish, we will open the floor so you can ask questions of the panelists. Are we good? All right. So we will begin by asking each one of our panelists, if he would, to spend about 2 or 3 minutes introducing himself, sharing with us the experiences that bring them to this work on public education, and then addressing this question of, is there really a crisis in public education? Is there really a crisis in public education? And if so, what should we be paying attention to? So again, 3 parts to this initial question. Who are you? And what brings you to this work on public education? And then, is there really a crisis in public education? And if so, what should we be paying attention to? So I'll start to the far right.
Excellent, and I'm assuming that this is, I still need the microphone? Yes. Okay, great. So good evening, brothers, and everyone else this evening. Again, my name is Maurice Green. I go by Mo. So I will just share just a few things about myself. I served as the attorney for the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Board of Education for a number of years, and then from that became the Chief Operating Officer and Deputy Superintendent for Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools. From there, I became the Superintendent of Guilford County Schools and served in that role for 7.5 years. From there, I moved to the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation, where I served as its Executive Director for 7+ years. One of the areas that Z. Smith Reynolds funds is public education. So it's through those experiences, and certainly I could reference others, that I believe that I have gained a bit of knowledge and experience related to this question about whether there's a crisis in public education. So then the question, and the answer to me would be, absolutely there's a crisis in public education. There's also an opportunity in public education. I'd like to spend a moment sort of talking about both. The crisis in public education, particularly in North Carolina, has been evident for many, many years. Certainly in the more recent term, there is, in my mind, a intentional dismantling of public education, an intentional dismantling of it. That would be evident in things like funding. So if you think about, there's a long-standing case in North Carolina called the Leandro litigation, that in every turn, no matter who really leaned into it, including the court system, it was pretty clear that the evidence is that there is inadequate funding of the public education system. At the same time then that there was an order to put into the public education system an additional $1.7 billion in this last year, the General Assembly decided not to honor that, but rather to take almost $500 million and put it into the expansion of a voucher program, which is intended to allow students to go to private school. There is a crisis when you think about the number of teacher vacancies across this state. There's a crisis when you think about the other positions in which there are insufficient numbers of folks to fill them. It's also a crisis when you look at academic outcomes for all students, but particularly Black and brown students. Particularly Black and brown students. We find ourselves with our Black and brown students often at the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to those academic outcomes, and I'm sure we'll spend more time sort of exploring that. This is also then an opportunity. Where there is crisis, there's a chance for us to step forward, certainly highlight the crisis, but then say, let's figure out ways to move our individual school districts and the entire state forward educationally. There are already many good things going on in public education, and we'll spend a moment or two, I'm sure, talking about some of those. We must build on those opportunities and areas of success such that we can be sure to educate all of our students, particularly our Black and brown students, to the levels that they are deserving in this state. So those are some issues that I think we also should be paying attention to, if you will, as we think about the crisis and we think about the opportunity. Thank you.
Good evening, brothers. My name is Terry Brown. I am an attorney by trade. I practice business litigation here in Charlotte, North Carolina. I also have the honor of serving in the North Carolina General Assembly. I represent North Carolina House District 92, which is Southwest Mecklenburg County. You guys are actually sitting in my district right now, so welcome to District 92. And I also have the honor of serving as the House Democratic Whip for my colleagues in the House. I come to this as the son of two public school educators growing up in Cumberland County, and I see how my parents were able to provide a good life for me. You know, we weren't rich growing up, but we were able to be taken care of and have everything that I needed when I was going to school. And I also see that myself now sitting here in my mid-30s, so many of my classmates who I went to college with who wanted to be educators like my parents were, who wanted to give back to the students across our state, who are now already retiring from the profession or have left the profession many years ago because they simply cannot afford to become and stay teachers. And with that, we're losing so much institutional knowledge. We think about so many of the teachers I had growing up. There were those old teachers who had been invested and been in the system for so long, who knew exactly how to reach students and impart that knowledge. And when you have students now, or teachers now, excuse me, who are only able to teach for 2, 3, 4 years, and they have to leave that profession because they can't afford it anymore, they can't make a living, they can't raise their own children and provide a life for their children, like my parents provided for me, that's a problem. I also, as part of the General Assembly, have a front row seat to the intentionality that Brother Green was talking about, of the dismantling of our public school system. And it is very clear that this is an intentional problem. So I look forward to this discussion we're going to have tonight and discussions of these problems, because it is a crisis, but there is a way out of that crisis. And I look forward to joining with you all tonight, brothers. Thank y'all.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Stay here. All right. Good afternoon. Good evening. I am Everett Ward, and I have the pleasure to have been involved in education for a number of years in various capacities. Most recently retired as president of St. Augustine's University, which is one of the oldest historically Black colleges in the state of North Carolina, founded in 1867. But prior to working at the university, I was involved with numerous universities in their outreach regarding education. North Carolina State University, for example, and then also 20 plus years with the state of North Carolina, specifically in one area of recruiting students to the state government process. And in those experiences, having been born in Raleigh, North Carolina, where I was surrounded by two historically Black colleges, I was introduced to the importance of education early in life. But one of the things I'd like to remind us historically was after the Civil War, there were three components that our former enslaved people requested, one of which was access to education. And so what we have witnessed in, I believe, in more recent years, as our colleagues have already stated, is a conservative agenda to dismantle public education. If you look intensely to our community as a people, it has been and continues to be education that served as that trajectory for upward mobility of our people. One of the challenges I think we have beyond the institutionalized strategy to undermine public education is also returning to our community the value of education, and also insisting and encouraging people to go into education. If you look at most of our historically black colleges now, at one time, the departments of education and the schools of education had the highest enrollment than most of the other disciplines on our college campuses. We have got to do a better job of recruiting people to education, lobbying for increased funding for educators so that they can make a living and be contributors to society. And so with that, I think there is opportunity, but I think that opportunity cannot be realized without the active engagement of our community, both at the school board level, both at the legislative level, where we are recruiting and voting for individuals who have a value for and appreciation for public education. And I think that is the charge of our community in collaboration with other individuals who have an appreciation for public education.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good evening, brothers and other guests. My name is Ernest Winston, and I have spent approximately 2 decades in public education, beginning as a classroom teacher, an English teacher at what was previously Vance High School, and now named after our dear brother, Julius L. Chambers High School. And I had the honor and the privilege of bringing that recommendation to our school board to rename Vance High School after Brother Chambers. From the classroom, I moved into a role in central office in our communications department, and through several other moves, I began working, by the way, under the leadership of Brother Mo Green when he was deputy superintendent in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. Mo departed for a wonderful opportunity as superintendent in Guilford County Schools, and I later, several individuals after he left, I later became superintendent of Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, serving nearly 3 years in that role, all of them during the pandemic that began in March of 2020. I am fortunate, my wife and I, to have 2 daughters in the public school system here in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, a high school sophomore and a 7th grader. Had the opportunity to chaperone a field trip yesterday with about several hundred 7th graders.
Oh boy.
And I will say it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure. Any of you brothers and ladies who have done that before, you all know what I'm talking about. Once a teacher, always a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And what brings me to education is the fact that, and I didn't have educators in my family, my immediate family, but my father, who's deceased, Dad grew up in Philadelphia, Mississippi. Dad left Philadelphia to join the Army. Dad left high school and never finished high school. And I would ask my older brother, biological brother, who's also a fraternal brother, I would ask him, why is Dad always going back to Mississippi for a class reunion? Because I knew he didn't graduate. And what my older brother told me was, Dad values education so much that it was important for him to be with his classmates. And I see another Brother Fleming, another Mississippian over there. He valued education so much that he wanted to go back and be with his classmates. So that instilled in me a sense of pride in education. Even though he didn't finish high school, he wanted to make sure that his kids understood the value of a public education. And so that's what brings me to this work. In terms of, is there a crisis in public education? As my fellow panelists have already said, absolutely. And I won't touch on some of the topics that they've already talked about for the sake of time, but I will peel back just one layer of the onion. And when we talk about student attendance, particularly in North Carolina, although it's not just a local or a statewide issue, this is a national issue that we're facing. But I wonder how many of you all know that approximately 500,000 students in public schools in North Carolina are considered chronically absent. And so what does that mean? Being chronically absent means missing at least 10% of the days during the regular school year. And that number has actually doubled since the 2018-2019 school year, pre-pandemic. So that translates to approximately 17 or 18 school days throughout the year. And when you think about that, if kids are not in school, it becomes impossible to educate them. And so that is absolutely a crisis in public education. And I don't put the blame on the kids. They're dealing with family issues, medical issues. Many of our older kids find the value in helping out with the family. And I know we'll talk a little bit about this later, but if you think about this, for nearly 2 years, we told families, stay at home. We're gonna do education differently. And so I also believe that some of our families have lost the value of education. And so with that, look forward to engaging in the rest of the conversation we'll have today.
Brother Winston, I'm going to stay with you for a moment, and I'm going to go off script a little bit, but you're Alpha man, you can follow me. One of the things we like to do in society at large, but particularly as it relates to education, is we like to romanticize the problem. What I mean by that is we like to talk about the problem, we like to analyze the problem, we like to discuss the analysis of the problem, and then we talk about all other issues connected to the problem. So we keep romanticizing the problem, and we rarely address said issue. My question for our panelists, each of you to some extent alluded to the intentional dismantling of public education. And we have romanticized that issue now for a few years. My question for you, as you think about the brothers who are in the room, Alpha Phi Alpha, the Divine Nine, people not in the room, Black community, and others, what do we do to address this issue of an intentional dismantling of public education? What concretely should we be doing to address the issue so that we can fight back, if you will, on this intentionality relative to dismantling public education?
Well, thank you, Dr. Graham. I'll be brief. First of all, and I was sharing with Representative Brown, I had a conversation on Tuesday with a public school teacher. It was after I had just went to vote, and she and I were having a conversation, and she saw my sticker that said I voted. And I said, absolutely, I did. I said, did you vote? She says, no. She says, I never voted. She says, I never voted. That broke my heart because we proceeded to have a conversation about why I don't vote. And she says, well, you know, I just kind of go with the status quo. I said, well, what happens when the status quo goes against your values and who you are? She says, well, I'll find a way out of it. I'll find my way through it. First of all, as we know through our dear Alpha, a voteless people is a hopeless people. And so when we don't vote, we don't have a voice. And so first of all, Dr. Gray, we have to vote. We have to be advocates.
That's it.
We have to be advocates, not just for ourselves and our individual families, but for the least of these.
Mm-hmm.
Because not every kid comes to school with the same resources and the same support that we in this room have. We have to be advocates for our teachers. I learned earlier this year of another teacher, who was considered homeless. Another teacher had saw her with a pillow and blankets in her car and alerted the administration. That shouldn't be. That shouldn't be. So when we talk about funding, we have got to make sure to hold those accountable whose responsibility it is to equitably and properly fund education. So holding the individuals accountable. And I'll pause there. And Dr. Graham, should I pass it to Brother General President?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Winston. Dr. Graham, I'm going to follow up on a couple of things that have already been said. I think it needs to be amplified. We've got to declare war on individuals and institutions who are trying to destroy public education. Too often, we are passive participants in society. There is an organization in the country now entitled Moms for Liberty. Don't let the name fool you. There is no liberation with those mothers. There is an all-out assault on public education by a group of conservative women with chapters throughout the country who are going to school board meetings, who are lobbying and advocating for curriculum change, who are advocating for what teachers can teach, what superintendents can administer. And we are sitting passively by as bystanders and not engaged. We must be engaged, as it's already been said, whether you have children or not. We've got to be at school board meetings, and we've got to elect persons to the school board who will advocate unapologetically for our children. And if they don't, we need to vote them out of office. So what I would suggest is that we do a couple of things. All of our organizations, all the fraternities and sororities, it's time for us to stop stepping for entertainment and go to school board meetings and speak out for our children. Number two, all information is public information for our school systems. I see Brother Jenkins here. Go to the school board and request the data that shows how many children are absent. What is the academic attainment of our children? Who are you suspending? Who are you expelling? And I guarantee you the majority of them will look like your children and my children I wanted to have. And so we've got to take on a very aggressive posture to deal with the issue. And so we've got to, just like we march for the right to vote, we've got to march, we've got to advocate, we got to raise money to preserve education. And if it's not what we want it to be, then we've got to be willing to destroy it. These are our tax dollars. And so when they can say in Wake County, which I'm a proud person born in Raleigh, 5 generations. But if children living in Scotland Neck, North Carolina, don't have the same resources as the children in Wake Forest and Cary, that is our problem. That's why we got to elect a superintendent who has a intellectual capacity and a willingness to make sure that regardless of where our children live, they can have access to a proper laboratory. They can have chemistry professors and teachers. They can have strong algebra teachers. You don't have to live in Wake County or Mecklenburg County to have access to quality education. That's our mandate, and I think that's what we need to do.
So I think it's important when we're thinking about public education and the crisis that's going on there is to take a step back and look at how we got there and what's being done intentionally to put us in this situation. And I think the number one way you can tell what people's priorities are by looking at their budget, looking at how they spend their money. And North Carolina, for the past decade plus, has consistently defunded public education, our public education system. And they come back and they say, well, the public education system is not working. And you look and say, why is it not working? Because we're not funding this system. We're not paying teachers. We're not putting the resources into place. And then at the same time, we're passing policies that are going to detrimentally affect those teachers and those students. I'm going to give you guys 2 examples of things that have happened this year in the General Assembly. So the first is House Bill 138. That is a bill that will take away, will give principals discretion to expel students, give them long-term suspensions for any number of violations they see fit for. It could be for talking back to a teacher. It could be for wearing the wrong thing in the classroom. It could be for showing up to school late. So I think all of us in this room are all for discipline. We want to make sure that students are being held accountable in the classroom. But we also know that there are certain teachers, there are certain principals, there are certain educators that don't know how to interact with students that look like us in this room. And this bill will be able to give principals and teachers all across the state of North Carolina carte blanche to say, if this student talked back to this teacher, I can expel them for the entire school year. Is that doing a student a service? It's not. It's not giving those students the resources they need and giving them the attention they need. We also have heard a lot of talk about, as Brother Ward alluded to, the Moms for Liberty and bills that they've advocated for and they've pushed throughout the General Assembly, dealing with Parents' Bill of Rights. And those things sound great. Parents should have rights in the classroom. I'm all for that. But when you drill down and look into what these bills are doing, they're taking away the ability for teachers to teach in the classroom. If a teacher can't teach a certain book they want to, a teacher can get suspended. They can require teachers to turn in their lesson plans on a daily basis to make sure that if a parent has any objection to what's going on in that classroom, that teacher might not be able to teach those materials. Parents who have no idea, and not even parents actually, it can go through for as far as somebody who is not even having a student in that school system can complain about what's going on in an individual syllabus. At the same time, as we're putting more and more restrictions on our teachers in our public school classrooms, we are also funding opportunity scholarships and the voucher programs for charter schools and private schools. This year in the General Assembly, we have funded the new opportunity voucher program. So now you can send your student and get state funding to take your student to go to any charter or private school across the state of North Carolina. There are no income caps on that, so you could be a millionaire and you could get paid by the state to send your child to a private school. At the same time, we know that money has to come from somewhere else. This year, before the budget passed, vouchers were funded at $138 million. That's a lot of money. The new budget that we passed this year will now fund that voucher program at $500 million. That money is going to be taken from our public school system. So now you have these charter schools. There was a story that came out about a charter school here in Charlotte that they couldn't even find the location of this school that was getting state funding. You've got charter schools who don't have to go through, or teachers don't have to go through any requirements to get licensed to teach there. They can come in off the street and teach there. And at the same time, teachers who are in our public schools who are being licensed, who have gotten their master's degrees, who have gone through extensive training and continual education. Now at the same time, you're going into their classrooms every single day and scrutinizing every single thing they do while they're not being paid anything. And we're funding these charter schools at excessive levels. All of these things go into play to systematically defund our public school system. You have parents saying, well, I don't want to send my kids to the public schools because they don't have the resources. Why don't they have the resources? Because we're not giving them the resources. It's not a money issue. The state of North Carolina is fiscally sound right now. We have got billions with a B in our surplus fund and our rainy day fund. And I hesitate to call it a surplus because when you have a surplus, that means you've taken care of all your bills. You have a little extra money left over. We're not taking care of all of our bills. As Brother Green mentioned earlier, we've had court cases going on. We are not funding our public school system. The Landreau case has said that, and we're not funding our public school system. So we are being derelict on our duty. But we have extra money, billions in the bank right now that we can use to fund our school system, but we're not because there's no political will for it, because the powers that be don't want that to happen. So it's imperative that we all go back to our communities and we go out there and we vote. Because right now, it is a Republican supermajority in the General Assembly. That means they can pass any piece of legislation, including our $28 billion budget, without even talking to a Democrat, without a single Democratic vote. That can pass the House. It can go over to the Senate, who also has a Republican supermajority, and they can pass a budget or any other piece of legislation without a single Democratic vote, without even speaking to a Democrat. There's no collaboration needed. It can go to the governor can veto something, it can come back to both chambers, and they can override his veto without a single Democratic vote there. And it gets worse, because if we want to challenge something in the courts, as we know right now, a few years back, the General Assembly, in all their wisdom, they decided to add party affiliations to our judicial ballots. So now instead of judges being nonpartisan, there's an R and a D beside all of our judges. Our state court of appeals has a Republican majority. Our state Supreme Court has a Republican majority until the earliest that we can tilt the balance is 2028 for the Supreme Court. We've had systematic gerrymandering that drew out 4 black men and 1 black woman from their seats last year in the General Assembly, and they're trying to do the exact same thing with this upcoming election. All of these things play into how we are dismantling and taking away power in education systems and from our communities. So that's the biggest thing that I can implore to say we can work on, that is to make sure that we pay attention, we educate our friends and our colleagues, our family members all across the state, because that's where these votes are taking place, and we make sure that we do what we have to do and show up when we have these elections.
So I'm going to certainly agree with everything that's already been said, and then perhaps go a different way. Alpha men, we lead. And so in a crisis, we need to be sure that we're leading. What does that translate to? That means we need to be thinking about what our roles should be in an active way in this state. We need to be serving on local boards of education. We need to be running for office. We need to be showing up on various educational committees. We need to be sure that we are leading folks to the polls. We need to be sure that we're doing the things that these gentlemen have already spoken about, but more. You see, no longer is it enough for us to say, let someone else handle that. Well, the challenge has become, that when we let someone else handle it, we end up with what we have. Alpha men, we must lead. This is a constitutional issue in the state of North Carolina. North Carolina is one of the states that makes public education a constitutional right. If we're not careful, that constitutional right won't be showing up in our communities. Our kids won't have the opportunities they so richly deserve. And then we'll be sitting around here talking about the crisis in public education. Meanwhile, we'll have to look at ourselves and say, did we lead? Now, if it's not within your being to lead in the way that I've suggested, because not everyone wants to run for particular office, then we must support those who are. And support must mean more than say, brother, I got your back. It requires resources, financial commitments to those who have said, I am going to step forward. And so I would suggest to all of us that all the things that folks have already said we must do, but we've got to go even steps further. As I look around this room, and the last thing I'll say is this. The educational system in North Carolina is not different from those in many other states. Over 3/4 of the educators in our state are white women. I'm not saying anything against any of those individuals. But when you think about that, then where are we? We need to think about becoming educators. You say, well, hold on, Mo, that ain't me. But you see, if we don't do it, then who will? We need to become educators. I know that the pay may not be what we want it to be, but we need to think about those who are coming after us as well. Some of us have already served in a career. And so now we're thinking about what's next. How about we become educators? There are too many young folk that need African American and black men to be in front of them, to show them the way, to be sure that they do not get a second-class education. And so I'm asking all of the things that all of these gentlemen have said, and I'm imploring all of us to dig deep and think about what we can do to serve the public education system of this state.
All right, brothers, I'm going to move quickly through this last question because I do want to open up the conversation to the audience. So, Brother General President, we're going to start with you with intentionality here. North Carolina has an advantage that many other states across the nation does not have. We have 10 historically black colleges and universities in our backyard. Significant advantage and impact for the state of North Carolina that we devalue, disenfranchise, and marginalize far too frequently. So my question to the panelists, very briefly, if you had an opportunity to sit down the presidents and chancellors of those historically black colleges and universities in North Carolina and their senior leadership teams and say to them, this is what we need you to do to step up to the plate to address said crisis in public education, what is it that you would say to them? How would you challenge an Anthony Graham, interim chancellor at Winston-Salem State University, and my cabinet to address this issue of a crisis in public education? Brother General President, I'll start with you.
Thank you for that question, Brother Brown. The first thing I would do is emulate a program that's in South Carolina, and I see Don Weston, our former district director from South Carolina, is here. In South Carolina, they have a program called Me Mister. And I think we have to be aggressive to, as presidents of historically black colleges, number one, we've got to fund programs to have scholarship dollars for young people, especially young black males, to become teachers. The second is, I think we have to say to the presidents and to the board of trustees, we need you to find dollars for educational programs so we can bring in strong professors for the Department of Education and establish schools of education at our historically black colleges. If you will remember, historically black colleges' anchor discipline was education. Winston-Salem State Teachers College, Elizabeth City University Teachers College, St. Augustine's strongest department was education. We've got to go back and invest in those disciplines around education. Those would be the first things I'd do. The second is, and I want to point him out as well, our regional vice president, Cecil Howard, and I see Dr. Harris is here as well, educator, dean of School of Education. We've got to look at ways in our own network on how we can raise money. Think about the foundations and the fellowship dollars we can set up ourselves. Wouldn't it be great if Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity and our local chapters would establish scholarships and fellowships in the area of education at our various historically black colleges and universities? We can go to homecoming and we can talk about the glory days of when I was there, and old college days swiftly pass and imbued with memories fond. But if I ask you for $1 to fund a scholarship or an endowed chair, everybody gets amnesia. We've got to invest in our own communities before we ask others to do. So that would be my conversation with a college president.
Thank you. Dr. Graham, before I briefly answer the question, I do want to build on something that Brother Green mentioned. And he talked about making sure that there's something that we can do to help address this crisis. I've got a really simple solution, and it doesn't cost a dime. We've got to go back to lifting the educators up.
Yes.
There used to be a time when educators in our community were highly thought of. Mm-hmm. Now, if your child or grandson or nephew or niece came to you,
yes,
and let's be real, and said, "Daddy, I think I want to be a teacher." Yeah, I see, that's the reaction. And so that reaction says a lot.
Yes, it does.
And so you've got to think about how you respond when young people say, "I want to be an educator," versus, and it's okay to be a lawyer, it's okay to be a psychologist, but how do you respond? What is your facial expression? What does your body language say when they say, "I want to be an educator"? Mm-hmm. Now, I'll also say this, it doesn't help that some educators don't hold themselves in as high esteem as they should. Was talking to a teacher one time and she said, "Oh, I'm just a teacher." I said, "Oh, you just a teacher? You're just a teacher." Mm-hmm. So you can't, Brother Ward, you can't want me to respect your profession more than you.
Amen.
And so we've got to do that.
That's right.
I would just echo what Brother Ward said in terms of our HBCUs and making sure that we're creating that pipeline of future educators. Where's Brother Douglas Jones? Is he still? He just, okay, didn't mean to call him out. But we've got to support our HBCUs. Brother Jones is a graduate of Johnson C. Smith University. If I'm correct, Dr. Graham, I believe a few years ago, JCSU eliminated their education program. So it's difficult to, they can't produce teachers. But we've also got to support them in that. And
Yes,
so
exactly.
we've got to make sure that our HBCUs have the right programs, which means they have to have the right resources, which goes back to funding and advocating and policy issues to make sure that we're creating that pipeline of future educators that look like us.
Okay, yeah. And I'll be brief and echo everything that the other panels have said. And to piggyback on what Superintendent Winston just mentioned, going back into making sure that we're giving our HBCUs those resources. I remember when I was growing up, the Teaching Fellows program was one of the most prestigious things that somebody could do. I remember being in high school and our principal would announce the winners of the Teaching Fellows Scholarship on the intercom. And that was a huge honor. And now in North Carolina, the Teaching Fellows program has been cut by tremendous bounds, and only 2 HBCUs, Fayetteville State and North Carolina A&T, are the only HBCUs that currently have the Teaching Fellows program. We need to make sure that we're getting these programs back to get that pipeline back so we can have, as Brother Green mentioned, have more teachers in our schools that look like us so they can impart that education in a way that our students can get that knowledge. And the last thing that I would say that I would encourage all of our HBCU chancellors, their board of trustees to do is to make sure that you are not afraid to be political. And I say that because everybody in the General Assembly is always talking about, we love our HBCUs. We want to make sure we support HBCUs. But when you look at those budget numbers, HBCUs are not getting funded at the rate that our other universities are getting funded. So I want to make sure that you all are holding myself and my colleagues' feet to the fire when we are saying we support our HBCUs, to make sure our HBCUs are actually getting those fundings and bringing your students, bringing your boards up to the General Assembly and saying, we're here, we deserve this money, we are the backbone of our communities, and we're not going to be quiet.
So I will just echo what everyone has already said and maybe just add the following. I believe that HBCUs ought to think about a strategy that will allow most, if not all, of the students that enter their universities and colleges to get a teaching certificate along with whatever else they may get. One thing, we ought to think about the fact that we can turn this around. We can turn this around. We already heard about the fact that we need to lift up educators and think about our facial expressions. Have used the term for many years, we need to revere educators. So now, if our HBCUs think about it from that vantage point, and so that when young people who are very impressionable come into their walls, and we say, yes, we want you to do whatever your goals are, but in addition, how about you get this certificate as well? What will begin to happen is more of our young folk will find themselves into the educational profession, and I believe will then start saying, this is a profession that is noble, which will get more people into the profession. So that would be something that I would encourage our HBCUs to do, along with whatever else these gentlemen have already lifted up.
All right, we're going to open the floor up very quickly for some questions that you might have for the panelists. And I would ask you, as much as possible, try to direct your question to a specific person so we can move efficiently through this component of the conversation.
Ron Wages, Baby New Lambda chapter here in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm probably the worst
person to stand up at the mic. This panel has forgotten more about this topic than I would ever know. So please be kind when I ask a sophomore question. Brother Brown's mic's gonna sound like I'm coming after you when I start out, but bear with me. Abuse of power via House Bill 138 or any other abuse is wrong. It doesn't necessarily make the rule wrong. It highlights the flawed people that we have in the role. If we had higher caliber people and motivated properly, they would use that power in a responsible fashion to meet the original intent of the rule. I'm a business guy, not an educator. So when business is my tool, every problem is like a nail. Okay, so if every problem is like a nail. Is it possible that if we focus on the issue of pay and allow vouchers for the best results and let capitalism take its hold, knocking down the barriers of politicians that aren't acting in the best interest of our children, pay on results, volume to motivate principals to keep as many students as possible? So we want to make sure that we educate as many students as possible, allow the money to move. Knock down the politicians that are, because we got to get out and vote. So Brother Brown, I'm agreeing with you there. Once we take care of that, let the vouchers move, we get our people so that we can actually get paid. I'll gladly go back and quit Duke Energy to be an educator if the money's right. But we need to make sure that the money's right first. And then there's going to be some turnover. Great educators are going to stay. The ones that aren't going to go. And we get better education. I will put that out there for it'd be nice.
Yeah, no. And I appreciate that question. And you're absolutely right. And I think that there's a lot of times the rhetoric gets into public schools versus charter schools and making it a this one versus that one situation. And I don't think that's necessarily the argument there. I don't think that the majority of people have anything against charter schools and the money flowing to charter schools. The issue is the fact that we are using the way the system is currently designed and the way the current political climate is designed is the money for the public education system is being used for charter schools and not being used for our public education system. If we were able to pay, we are able to pay our teachers a living wage. We are not. And they're doing that, it's a political issue because they are able to say, our school system is not being funded well. Our schools are falling apart. Our public schools are falling apart. We've got a better system in place with the charter schools. So let's funnel money to the charter schools instead of trying to fix the public schools. But what they're not saying is the schools are falling apart. We're not paying our teachers right. People are leaving because you're using that money. You're creating an artificial dichotomy there. So the perfect world would be you still have that charter school system because public schools aren't for everybody. And there are specialty schools, there are schools that are more in tune for every school student's individual needs, and we can still fund those charter schools, and we can also make sure we're funding our public school system at a higher level. The issue is we're not doing that now, and the current political climate is not the ones who are doing that. And that's where it gets into choosing better elected officials and choosing who is in politics that way better. So I think everything you said is spot on. And we need to get to the system where we are being able to fund both, but we're not there yet until we can change the way politics are working.
If I could, I think we also need to understand we've got to be very clear and focused. Charter schools were set up as a method to resegregate schools. Charter schools were set up so that persons who could not afford to send their children to private school could use tax dollars to move their children out of public schools. So let's not intellectually discuss this and not call it for what it is. I know what happens in North Carolina. You didn't want your children to go with our children to public school. So you formed these schools that were church affiliated because you couldn't pay for them to go to the Catholic school or the Episcopalian school. So you came to the state and said, give us the money so we can set up a private school for our children. So let's call it for what it is.
Can I say one more thing too about that? Just really quick one. And I don't want to beat a dead horse on this topic, but I do think it's important to denote the distinctions between the various levels of schools. And it goes back to how we're funding and our constitutional obligation to provide a sound basic education for every single North Carolina student. Technically, charter schools are public schools, and that is why they're able to get state funding. The distinction there is, as Brother Green is running to be the superintendent of schools, he would not have the same oversight over our charter schools as he would over our traditional public schools like a CMS or a Wake County schools or what have you. There is a distinction. Private schools are separate level of schools that are not getting state funding. However, now under the current system with the educational voucher system we have there, they will be able to get state funding for those private schools. It comes down to me as a level of equity that we have to think about when we're thinking about our educational system. It's not equitable that charter schools are getting the same funding that public schools are getting, or more funding than public schools are getting, when their teachers are not having to meet those same requirements, meet the same oversight guidelines, and fall under those same criteria. I think that if we can bring the system in line, because I think there is a place for private schools, there's a place for public schools, there's a place for charter schools. If we can bring the system in line, there's no issue with that. But right now, we are filling up the bucket for private schools, we are filling up the bucket for charter schools, and our traditional public schools, which are for every student, are falling by the wayside. And the issue with the private and the charter schools that they run into is they can turn a student away. If you have a disability, if you have other special needs, a charter school or a public school does not have to accept you. And our public schools have a constitutional and a statutory requirement to accept every single student. So I think that we need to make sure that we are funding everything equitably and making sure that we're not letting one go with more, one go with less.
I also want to add, just for your awareness, in terms of unequal expectations, our traditional public schools have the expectation that 100% of its instructional workforce is fully licensed. That expectation is not in place for charter private schools. So unequal expectations there as well. Final question.
Brother Dr. Graham, we have the final question from Dr. Ida Jones Pittman, the First Lady of ANCA of this house. Let's give her a round of applause.
I come to you as a fully educated person out of public schools. I attended public schools in elementary, high school, undergraduate, and in college. So I'm proud of public education. I did not have the fortunate opportunity to attend an HBCU, but my children attended and graduated from HBCU. I currently teach at Ben L. Smith High School in Gifford County. It is one of our comprehensive high schools with over 45 different countries represented. I teach math. I teach math at the lowest level, and I also have an AP course. I will say this, I'm disappointed in the funding for education in general. I'm also concerned about students that are allowed to go to charter or even private schools receiving the monies. But when those schools decide they need to send them back because they can't deal with the educational needs of our children, and they don't send the money back that they received, it becomes a challenge for us in the public school system to do exactly what it was designed to do. Now, I'm all for alternative educations. I mean, I even sent one of my children to a private school because of her educational need. I have siblings who also attended private schools because of their educational needs. So I'm not knocking those alternative sources. But I ask, what can be done today to eliminate the dollars that are funneled out. The kids are bundled back in, but then the money stays out. Can we at least agree we can close that gap? That's my question. I'm supposed to direct the question to somebody. I go to the representative here that's on the panel.
Which, do you want to take it, or yeah. So I appreciate that question, and thank you for bringing that. Thank you for your service as an educator as well. That's the biggest question that we're having right now. That's the biggest problem. And proponents of the current system and the funding that that the General Assembly gave to charter schools this year, they say it's follow the kids. They want the funding to follow the students, and they want to fund students, not systems. And that is what the current model is set up for. And it goes back to the previous question that we're saying there, that the state of North Carolina has the ability to fund both systems fully. The state of North Carolina has that ability. The state of North Carolina is not doing that because of I'll be honest, there's outside influence being given to the charter school system and that funding, and there's lack of oversight there. So you're following those dollars. I think that it is incumbent on everybody in this room and everybody to go back to your families, go back to wherever you live, wherever you grew up at, and encourage your family members to advocate for equal funding of all our public education systems. Because there's no reason why teachers should be having to come out of pocket for students. There's no reason why this funding should not be able to be equitably spread out. We've got billions of dollars to do this. The Supreme Court 2 years ago just said with their Leandro ruling they needed $1.7 billion. We've got that, and we'll have money left over, and we can fund that, and we can still have charter schools, we can still have private schools, but we have to make sure that we're taking care of our constitutional obligation to fully fund our fully public school system. And I'll also let Brother Green respond to that question as well.
Thank you. So, to me, this is a legislative issue. And, this isn't something that I think can just be handled at a local level or just, happen tonight, unfortunately. We've got to have a legislative change that says if we're going to have this system where the dollars follow the child, then when the child comes back, then the dollars must follow the child back to the public school system. That's got to be part of legislation.
You said legislative, so I had my ears perked up, and I would agree with everything you said. And again, like I said earlier in my previous discussions, we've got to look at the full picture. North Carolina for many years was known as the education state. We were number one in education in the South and across the country. 2008, the United States elected Barack Obama, first black president. 2010, Republicans took control of the North Carolina General Assembly. Since 2010, we've had a steep decline in education funding. And right now, I was preparing for this panel, we are 36 in the nation in total teacher pay and 46 in starting teacher pay in North Carolina. We went from being the pinnacle of education in this country to now being at the bottom of the barrel. Alabama is above us. No offense to anybody from Alabama, but Alabama is above us in education. And if I were somebody who was plotting how things happened, the decline started when a certain party took control of the General Assembly. And I'll say this, out of the 120 members of the General Assembly, of the House of Representatives, that party only has one person who looks like any of us in this room. And the 50 members of the North Carolina Senate, they have 0 members that look like any of us in this room.
So family, we have reached the end of this panel. And what I want to do is close by leaving you with some information that I hope you'll chew on. And more importantly, I hope it will move you to act. Again, I don't believe in romanticizing the problem. If a problem exists, you fix it. A few statistics for you. One of the things that has not been mentioned, I had the honor of serving as the chairperson of Governor Roy Cooper's Drive Task Force. That task force was formed in December of 2019, focused on how we diversify the K-12 teacher workforce and how do we address equity issues in our K-12 classrooms. So I have the honor of serving in that capacity. A couple of things I want you to know and walk out of this building knowing. With respect to our K-12 educator demography, 79% of North Carolina's classroom teachers white. 79%. Nationally, we are at average. Nationally, it's 79%. 72% of North Carolina principals, white. 72% of North Carolina school counselors, white. It's an ecosystem of whiteness. With respect to our student demography, 54% of North Carolina's current K-12 students are racially and ethnically diverse. So the majority of our students are students of color, but we pale in comparison with respect to our educator ecosystem. With respect to our educator preparation programs, a lot of people don't talk about our ed prep programs. The ed prep programs fuel the K-12 classroom, principalships, and so forth. With respect to our educator preparation programs, the traditional pathway, we experienced a 17.6% decline in teacher candidates enrolled in our UNC school institutions' educator preparation programs. That's all 17 institutions. But what no one ever does is peel back by disaggregating. If you look only at our HBCUs, the entities that prepare the majority of our Black classroom teachers in the state of North Carolina, 48.9% decline. 48.9%. Our Black students who choose to pursue an education degree graduate with twice as much debt in terms of loans compared to their white counterparts. Our starting pay is going up to $39,000. You just heard it's 46 in the nation. I started teaching in 1997. My starting salary was $30,000. In 26 years, the salary has increased by $9,000 for a starting teacher. With respect to professionalization, North Carolina has the unique distinction of having more nationally board certified teachers than any state in the United States of America. 23% of our teachers are national board certified. You're probably wondering, what does that mean? National board certification means you teach at a certain standard. You are a master or expert teacher. So 23%, we lead the way nationally. Again, peel back the layers of the onion though. 93% of those national board certified teachers, white. 93%. I'll also add that there's a 12% pay increase that comes with being national board certified. So the challenge that I issue, good brothers of Alpha Phi Alpha and all our family members in the room, in leadership, we talk about a simple concept called DAC, D-A-C. Direction, alignment, commitment. Direction, alignment, commitment. Where are we pointed as a fraternity, more specifically as a district as it relates to these issues in public education? You've heard a lot of things here this evening. The intentionality of dismantling public education, teacher retention and vacancies, compensation issues. We could go on and on and on and on and on. There are a lot of issues in public education. We can't be everything to everybody. Because if you do, you're going to be identityless. You won't know who you are. What are we willing to tackle as a district? What's our direction on said issue? Until we figure out what the direction is, we're always going to be misaligned. Brothers, I would argue we're misaligned. We need to figure out the direction. What's the target? Then we can start asking ourselves, how do we align our resources? How do we align our expertise? How do we ensure that our communities are aligned around said issue? And then we can start getting into what Brother Green talked about earlier with respect to commitment. commitment, time, money, sweat equity, but it all starts with direction. So I'll leave you with this quote from noted child psychologist Eileen Janot, who was in the New York area. And it goes as follows. I have come to the frightening conclusion that I am the decisive element. It is my personal approach that creates the climate. It is my daily mood that makes the weather. I possess tremendous power to make a person's life miserable or joyous. I can be a tool of torture or an instrument of inspiration. I can humiliate, hurt, or heal. In all situations, it is my response that decides whether a crisis will be escalated or de-escalated, and a person humanized or dehumanized. Brothers, we are the decisive element. What are we willing to do with what God has blessed us? The ability to lead, our intellectual capacity, our ability to problem solve and critically think, our ability to galvanize. We are the decisive element. What are you currently doing? If the answer is not enough, then you are not serving your role as the decisive element. Brothers, Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated is the decisive element. How are we leveraging our status and our position to make a difference? Or are we simply romanticizing the issue yet again? This is probably the third or fourth time I've participated in a panel since I've been a brother of Alpha Phi Alpha in the District of North Carolina on the crisis in public education. It was a crisis then, it's a crisis now. What have we done to fix said crisis? Enough is enough. Let's thank our panelists.
Let's keep it there. You thank our moderator, Brother Dr. Mr. Brown. And as we are standing, let's welcome our 24th District Director of the Association of North Carolina Alpha and District Director Dr. Pickett for closing remarks. Thank you very much. Did you learn something?
Thank you. Let's give Brother Marcus Bass a hand for a job well done. This committee thought about the process of having a public program. Again, too, I want to thank the panelists for the opportunity for me to serve this evening. It's always good to see somebody from Rainbow Friend. And we came up with the same educational curriculum down in Kinston, North Carolina, with the same church. But before I go any further, will you please rise and recognize the General President of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, Brother Willis Lawson. And certainly, we stand here, Anthony indicated, I always say to my leadership team, education is the passport to our future. I learned when I was taking a mass communication class that the one with the knowledge is the one with the power. And I know from what I do at work, we have to study our craft. And basically, we have to align ourselves as a group. And we have to make sure that we're building relationships. And when I talk about, I'm fortunate enough to know that this evening starts as a tipping point as we move forward. You would know that I can talk to 7 superintendents in North Carolina. We have about 6 superintendents in education in North Carolina, and I talk to them on a regular basis. We have multiple members in the North Carolina General Assembly that I call on a regular basis, even though this is the first time that I've met Brother Brown, but I've talked to him 10,000 times, and not only that, but I even had somebody send him a check, Brother Ward. I had somebody send him a check.
It was much appreciated.
Oh, yes, my good brother. But I know this, he's right, and certainly at the end of the day,
we need to make sure we gotta put our money where our mouth is. We gotta make sure we active participants. We gotta make a difference. We gotta get involved. And Anthony, I know at the regional level, Vice President, we have the main strategy. You'll hear a lot more about it tomorrow from the committee that we're doing. We're doing some work, but we have to do more work. And one of the things that we're trying to do in North Carolina, to your point, we don't need for chaplains to be going through the motions of putting up a facade. You know, there has to be, as Milton Davis says, there has to be some tangible evidence that what we're doing looks like the work that we say we are who we are. And that's what we're going to be doing. My time is short. You probably should say short tonight, but it's certainly short in the next, since March the 3rd. But know this, while I still have sitting in the seat, we certainly will have an opportunity to gather, and I'll be calling on you, homeboy, to lead the way as we ask, when we call all our superintendents, to lead the way as we try to make a difference in this at-risk community that we're trying to serve out on across the state of North Carolina. But we do know what we do is local, and activities have to be done at the local level. I certainly take a moment of personal privilege to say shout out to my lovely wife, Dr. Pippin. It's good to see you, honey. Every time my cousin can say, that's my baby, I certainly do that. Certainly, she comes from a family of education. Her mother integrated Memphis State. She's her mother was one of the 8 members who integrated Memphis State back in the early 70s. Her dad is a graduate of Michigan State back in 1962. Her mother was a strong educator, 25 years. My wife's sister has an ED. Brother and other sisters have an MBA, all educators and throughout the school. And that's where we need to make a difference. But education starts at home. I know that COVID has allowed us not to do the things. But chaplains got to get back to those educational programs. We also we're getting back to our LDCI program that we're doing across the state and region. So look forward for Alpha Phi Alpha getting back involved. These are conversations that we're having each day. We hear you, and we know it's important. But we are going to put our money where our mouth is, and I'm excited about what we do. At this point, what do we do next, Marcus?
We have a photo with all the panelists, with all of our regional vice president, with our general president here over on this side. And then you may want to announce the next event, Stephanie.
The first guest, I want to thank you for all coming this evening. Again, we appreciate all the activities, and we're excited. And after we take the photo, the next event this evening is at 8:30, it'll be our step show. Is that right, Kevin? Oh, next door. I want to make it out the doors next door. Okay. At this time, thank you very much. Thank you for the panelists. Now we sign for it. Get together for a moment. Thank you.